I'm always working on the next thing. So one of the things I find with readers when I'm talking to readers and doing talks and panels and conventions is I hear some people saying, oh, I'm working on this book and this one and this one. And I'm like, stop right there, go back, and you work on one book until it's done. Then the other idea is in the back of your brain going, oh, it's amazing, you need to write this because it's so cool. That's the world building side. That's the fun part. That's the kind of exciting aspects of it. Whereas in reality, you've then got another 6, 8, 12, 24 months of slogging your way through to write the book. And that's when it can become difficult and people kind of give up because they feel like, oh, well, it's actually kind of a marathon. And it is. So what I do is when those cool ideas are shouting at me, you should be writing this. It's that meme with the guy walking down the street with his girlfriend and the other person. That's like the book you're writing and the book that you're saying, hey, now this one's amazing. You should, this cool idea you've got. It's that in my brain. But what I do is I write it all down. I let it build up in the back of my brain until it's kind of bugging me. And then I put it all down on a Word document and just add it all down.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 111 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, the Chewie to my Han Solo, the Joker to my Commander Shepard, MJ Kuhn. How's it going, MJ?
Hello, I'm doing lovely. How are you?
Doing very well. Doing swell today. Doing well and doing swell. And I'm going to pimp my girl's books because she's the best, and I adore her. And if you want some thieving action, you can go pick up her debut, Among Thieves, the Blue Baby, and the sequel, Thick Ass Thieves, the Green Baby. If you want a double dose of thieves and heists and swearing and hatchets, and not very many whores, but there's a lot of fun stuff in this. So you're gonna love it.
Just a couple here or there.
Just a smattering of whores.
Just like a little sprinkle. Awesome. Well, and then also gotta check out my boy Adrian's book. Got Mushroom Blues. We have Fungal Punk, Noir, Detective, Mushrooms, Badassery, Murder, all that stuff. If that sounds interesting.
I got the naked hardcover right here.
Oh, that cover art. I am dead. It's so good.
Yeah.
Felix
so good. Best. Shout out to my boy Felix Ortiz. As well, a quick note for listeners, the official SFF Addicts Patreon and merch store are live, so check the links in the description to support what we do here. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And now, welcoming today's esteemed guest, Stephen Aryan, author of The Coward, The Warrior, The Age of Darkness, and Age of Dread trilogies, as well as The Judas Blossom and its brand new sequel, The Blood Dim Tide. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
There it is.
It's there.
Thank you for having me. And there it is, The Blood Dim Tide.
Yeah.
Early author copies.
Just soak it up.
Oh my God.
Beautiful.
That red. Oh, I love it.
It's bloody and beautiful, and very, very happy to have you here, buddy.
Thank you.
It's been a long time coming, but I'm glad that we finally get the chance to sit down and chat. But before we dig deeper into things, we'll start off with an introduction. If you can let listeners know who you are, a little bit about yourself and your work.
Sure. I've been writing for a very, very long time, and I took the hard and long path to getting traditionally published. It took many, many books and many, many years because I wasn't good enough, and I had to get my skill level up. I debuted in 2015 with my first book, Battle Mage, the first of a trilogy. I did a 2 trilogy with Orbit. And I mostly write epic fantasy, but with my current trilogy, it's historic fantasy, which is really, really challenging, lots of research, really, really difficult. And I made a complete rod for my own back because I thought it'd be fun. And it's been a challenge, and it's been the most difficult series I've ever written, but I'm enormously proud of the work. So I'm really, really happy to have delved into it and just done something so different to anything I've done before. But yeah, so the Blood Dim Tide that comes out the 9th of July this year will be my 10th traditionally published novel.
Double digits.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. That's like Honestly, that's like a huge milestone, and I feel like you get a whiskey for that. An extra whiskey on top of the one that you just like get for publishing the book, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Thank you.
I will get you a whiskey in Birmingham.
there you
as a
go.
celebration. Yeah.
Nice, cool.
A
Okay,
whiskey
okay.
with Adrian.
I'll just like sprinkle some drop of acid in there or something like that.
maybe don't
Wow,
drink from Adrian.
maybe don't spike my drink. Maybe just buy me a drink and say thanks or well done. Let's not
well done,
spike
sir.
me.
You're in for a night.
Here's a trip. What?
It's
That wasn't on the kind
turn.
of schedule for today, but okay.
Surprise.
Oh my god.
Certainly will be.
Before we dig deeper into the episode, a quick word from our sponsor. 4 titans sleep beneath the earth. Only one fae can keep them from waking. Silbury is an orphaned wood nymph, taken from her forest home and raised in the corrupt city of Pendurin. The fae child grows up unaware of who she is, what she can do, and the calling of her kind. Under the control of a cruel guildmaster, Silbury is trained as an assassin. As an adult, she escapes her violent past to start a new life and a family. But a tragic death brings her back to the familiar cobbled streets to seek revenge. This dark path leads Silbury to uncover an even darker secret. An ancient evil will wake the Titans and break the world. Silbury must travel with her daughter across a war-torn land to defeat that evil. What begins as a fairy tale transforms into a sweeping, multi-generational epic about love and loss, and a woman with a strange connection to nature. The Dryad's Crown by David Hopkins is a powerful and emotional debut fantasy novel. The Dryad's Crown is available now in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Visit dryadscrown.com to purchase the book from your favorite online retailer. And now, enjoy the rest of this episode of SFF Addicts.
Well, before we get totally off the rails, already too late. This is going to be a fun one, I can already tell.
Oh, God.
But we always delve into our guests' nerdy origins here on the show. So, and I feel like especially since you said you'd been writing for a long time before even your first book got published, you've been in publishing for almost a decade now, traditionally published, and coming out with your 10th book. What books, shows, movies, games in your earlier life kind of got you hooked on sci-fi fantasy? And if you can think, if there's any that made you go, oh, I want to do that, I want to write something.
So growing up, I'm of the generation of watching like Incredible Hulk was on the TV back in the day, and I watched all the things like A-Team and all the other things like that, and Air Force and stuff. But reading was the real thing for me. I started really, really young, reading lots of, learning to read books like goblins and dwarves, and even at that age, my mum and dad got me those kind of like 5 words on a page kind of book, but amazing drawings, and it was all kind of fantasy early. So by the time I was in primary school, I was very much into kind of mythology, Greek and Roman, because that's kind of all we had to begin with. I was constantly going to libraries as a kid and get as many books as you can, and take them out and read them that week and go back the next week. So I was just a library kid back in my hometown. And it started with like David Eddings and Terry Brooks and C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, of course. And as I got older, delved into David Gemmell, who was an enormous influence, and remains so, on me and my work. Dragonlance books, Ursula Le Guin, and the Earthsea books, which were fantastic. Just all of the kind of things that were coming out at that time, I was just soaking up and really getting into it. It's hard to kind of pinpoint, because whilst that's going on, there's all the stuff on TV and film that you don't really think about. Like E.T. was one of the first films I ever saw as a kid, and it's sci-fi, and it's heartbreaking and terrifying and weird, and then like Close Encounters and just Star Trek was constantly in the background, and just all these things trickle in. And yet it's one of these things until I got into my mid-20s and thought, why have I never attempted to write sci-fi? I watched tons of it, you know, I love Firefly and Babylon 5 and Star Trek and Star Wars, all that kind of stuff. But I've never written sci-fi, and I don't know why I never kind of thought about doing it until I was much older. So
It's never too late.
I've done some bits and pieces more recently, which is what's the kind of interesting thing. But yeah, I'm constantly soaking in all these kind of genre things we call now. And I think at one point my parents were a little bit worried because that was all I was reading. But then they're equally like, well, you know what? He is reading all of the time. He's never without a book. So that's probably a good thing.
Keeping him out of trouble. I think
Yeah.
as soon as you said that the early reader books already had goblins and stuff, I was like, your parents were doing it right. That's like me as a parent, right?
I'm
start you on the
already.
nerd path
They set you
early.
up for it, man. Yeah.
Yeah. But then I started to diversify into things like I read a lot of Dean Koontz because I loved his kind of thriller and pacey and supernatural, and Stephen King was a big influence, and Lovecraft. And once I'd read the entire Myths and Legends section at the school library, I then went to the town library and expanded beyond Greek and Roman into like Asian and West African and Middle Eastern and basically whatever I could find, and lots of King Arthur books, which I obsessed about. And the Bernard Cornwell Last King trilogy, that is my favorite King Arthur series of all time. They're so good. So good. Yeah, all of that was just basically feeding into me for years, until at some point I think I was in my teenage years, and I thought I read a book from a library, a fantasy book, and I hated it because I thought it was awful. And I thought, you know what? I can do better than this.
So it wasn't so
11.
much a happy motivation. It was motivation by spite.
It was hate. And spite.
Yeah.
And this is rubbish. I can do better. I think I did about 5 chapters of something. And another time I attempted to do it like on audio. I was recording it on a cassette tape.
Nice.
And I think about 4 minutes. I think that's all I managed.
You were like an early audio dramatist.
Basically, yeah.
Damn.
Dragonlance books were a massive for me as a kid. All that kind of stuff. Because before the internet, I am old enough to remember that, we didn't really know what those books were. We just thought they were fantasy books. I had no idea about the role-playing side and all that kind of thing. So I just grew up reading, the early Dragonlance books and loving them, and the Twins trilogy and all that kind of stuff. And really, really influential, really kind of important series that if I go back and read, I'm sure I'd see some of the kind of cracks. But back then, it was just a strong foundation to find all these different things that fed my love of fantasy, and it's still there now. I'm still a reader. I know some fantasy authors can't read fantasy. They say it's too much like a busman's holiday. It's, they can't switch off that part of their brain. But I'd find that really distressing if I can no longer read fantasy as well as write it, because I love it. I couldn't be without reading, and I can't be without reading fantasy. So I read other things now, but it's still my first love.
Dude, that's awesome though. And aside from spite and hate, kind of feeling how, because you mentioned a lot of like big literary influences like Dragonlance, everything across the board, even like how the TV shows that you watch, the movies and everything like that, all of it just kind of gets like sucked into the mind blender and eventually starts to trickle out into the things that we write. And
yes.
How did those things shape your writing in terms of like its style and the themes that you were kind of approaching, and as your writing journey kind of progressed after your dramatist years at 11 years old?
Like the Muse. When was the Muse going to Christmas? I think I wrote, looking back at some of the earlier stuff, my trunk novels, I think I was writing, to begin with, it was copying. It's a lot of fan fiction and things. Like, I was writing TV scripts as well for some of my favorite TV shows. And if you go back far enough, things like Star Trek used to have an open door policy where you could write a script and send it in. And some of the best ones were made into TV shows. And some of the best writers were then taken on and have become massively famous writers within that space. Like Ronald D. Moore, he knew someone who worked on the show, and he was like, and he sent a script in, and now he's, huge and all these kind of things. So things like Dean Koontz and Stephen King fed in, because in all my books, there's a bit of creepiness and there's a bit of darkness and there's a bit of the supernatural in everything. I love crime for some reason. I never kind of write a straight crime novel until probably fairly recently, but there's a lot of that in my books too, kind of police procedurals. I grew up watching a lot of those shows too. you know, all American TV shows and NYPD Blue and lots of British kind of cop shows. All these things fed in. So I always and reading, it wasn't later I started reading things like Robin Hobb, and some of the Terry Brooks novels are huge. They're absolute doorstoppers. But I love reading them, but I always wanted to write something that was quite pacey and lean, that lent more towards the David Gemmell kind of model. It just suited me better. I wanted to have interesting characters and world building, but I didn't want to kind of wallow too much. I wanted to just keep going. So I think that was the kind of the thriller aspect that fed in and shaped my work. Yeah, right from the beginning.
You and I bonded over crime thrillers. When you interviewed me, we were just like, oh, police procedurals. You actually like opened my eyes, because it wasn't something that I was conscious about while writing. But you opened my eyes to like the ways in which I'd blended genres in a way that was like kind of, because it's something you do really well in your work. It's like you have foundations of familiarity, whether it's in like the way that you pace your books, or the way that, or sort of like a genre that you're pulling into a fantasy world, what have you. You do a really good job at grounding the reader, and then introducing stuff that could otherwise feel a bit more heavy-handed. You know what I mean? Where it's like you do everything very delicately, and this is exactly what you managed to pull off with your world building as well. Is like,
thank you.
Even though you got like that lean kind of approach to it, your world building is always very intricate and very believable. So can you walk us through your process a little bit for creating a detailed fantasy world, and kind of approaching it from like a more lean angle? You know, like I've always been curious, like if you've plotted this stuff, or how you approach your world building from that aspect, or if you're just like, fuck it, let's just pants it and go for it.
No, I'm definitely a
You do not
planner.
seem like a pantser.
I've tried it. So early on, I tried being a pantser. I did a whole science fiction novel about like a colony on Mars and designer babies and DNA and kind of cloning and all this kind of thing. And I had a core of an idea, and I just wrote the whole novel. And I got to the end, looked back and thought, this is terrible. This is not salvageable. I cannot resurrect this in any way,
You
no matter how many
Sci-Fi
times.
I
for yourself.
was just gonna say that's why you
Probably.
never went back to sci-fi.
It took me a long time. I was like, no, this isn't work. So I knew that pantsing it wasn't for me. I'm like, okay,
Right.
so some level of planning is necessary. But I'm always working on the next thing. So one of the things I find with readers when I'm talking to readers and doing talks and panels and conventions is I hear some people saying, oh, I'm working on this book and this one and this one. And I'm like, stop right there, go back, and you work on one book until it's done. Then the other idea is in the back of your brain going, oh, it's amazing, you need to write this because it's so cool. That's the world building side. That's the fun part. That's the kind of exciting aspects of it. Whereas in reality, you've then got another 6, 8, 12, 24 months of slogging your way through to write the book. And that's when it can become difficult and people kind of give up because they feel like, oh, well, it's actually kind of a marathon. And it is. So what I do is when those cool ideas are shouting at me, you should be writing this. It's that meme with the guy walking down the street with his girlfriend and the other person. That's like the book you're writing and the book that you're saying, hey, now this one's amazing. You should, this cool idea you've got. It's that in my brain. But what I do is I write it all down. I let it build up in the back of my brain until it's kind of bugging me. And then I put it all down on a Word document and just add it all down. So my new series that I'm writing now that hasn't been announced, that I've been working on it, I've been world building it for 3 years in the background. Like everything. I've got a world Bible for all my series. And I go with the approach of the stuff that's on the page is just the tip of the iceberg. It's 10% of the stuff that's there. So that if I suddenly come to a chapter and I think, well, we'll go left instead of right and see what happens, I know what's down that road. I don't need to say, well, what does the building look like? And what happens if they get on a ship and go over there? And I know it. I've got a map somewhere, or I've planned it out, and the cities and the cultures and the language and all that kind of stuff. I don't go down to what's on the coins, because to be honest, I couldn't give a shit. That's not what I'm focused on in the story. It's character and it's world building and it's flavor, and it has to hang together in a way that if you interrogate it, it makes sense. So I've been doing that with some people I've been mentoring. They're building their worlds, and then I'll just kind of like poke holes in it and say, what happens if this goes on? And they're like, oh yeah. Then they go in and think about it, and just, it's like building a spider web, and you just constantly put another thread on, and then you test it and go, no, do another thread. So I'm always doing that, and I'm making notes, and those cool little kind of ideas you get, kind of, oh, that's a great thing. Write it down, and put it down. I've got Post-its and notes on my phone, but I collate it, and then I add to it, and then I revise it, and then I polish it, and that's going on for like a couple of years every time before I start writing the first chapter.
It does take a lot of control, though, to basically be like, okay, here's like the sexy idea in the red dress with the big boobs, just like taunting me, on the street. It's like, what do you got? What's going on here? But then it takes a lot of control to be like, I'm gonna add to that world and kind of flesh it out bit by bit, note by note, sentence by sentence, idea by idea, and then come back to it later.
Come back to it
after the
later.
current project is done. Like that takes
it's
a lot
fun.
of self-control. Yeah,
it does. But world building is fun. And like I spoke to one guy once. He said he's been world building for 5 years. I'm like, dude, you should have stopped after 12 months and started writing a book. Now you're just building a D&D campaign. You're not actually writing the book, and it's so fun to do. So that's a kind of like a pressure valve of you're writing a book and you need a bit of light relief. Just go and build a bit more on the world building. That's fun and exciting and totally creative. You don't think about it. You're like, oh, this could be now this and this and this, and you just blast it all down. And that kind of stretches that muscle. And they're like, right now, back to the book and keep building it and chipping away at the mountain. And that's the only way to do it. It's always discipline over motivation. It's not my phrase. I've stolen it from other people, but that's the kind of thing that I go by.
I'm going to clip it as if you came up with it yourself.
I came up with the phrase discipline over motivation. I invented it. Stephen Aryan, TM.
On the front of this episode with just that on it.
I coined that phrase.
That's me. No big deal.
Oh, so the coin would be minted with your own face.
That's right.
There you go.
It's me, my angry face on the coin.
Every world of all of Stephen's
If a coin
book,
could make a
it's
noise.
his angry face.
Yep.
I love the comparison to that meme though, because that is always how it feels. And like for me, it's because like that new shiny idea, you haven't broken it yet by trying to write it. Like, right? Because that's what I'm always like, ooh, I have this new shiny idea. Let me fuck it up by trying to write it now. And that's how it goes every time. No, I think that's great advice for everyone out there. If you are feeling that way, just start another document, start squirreling away those ideas, saving up all those little tidbits.
But if it's good as well, that's the other thing. Like a thing I read years ago by Dean Kuntz, he'd always come up with ideas. And what he would do was write down stuff on a bunch of cards and then put them in the drawer. And once he's finished one book, he'd get out the cards and go through them and look at all his ideas. And some of the ideas would be like, yeah, that was great when I thought about it 2 years ago. And now looking at it, I'm not really sure I want to write that, or not, it doesn't sound as good. And he'd pick a different idea, the best one in the pack. And that's the next book he would write. So I also think by writing it down, you leave it to rest, and then you can come back and say, oh, I can improve on it. I can make it better, or I'm not too sure about that now. And so it's good. It's like a cake. You leave it to rest for a bit before you eat the whole cake.
Yeah.
Or you eat the whole cake. No. Like, live your dreams. Do what you want. I think that's great. Yeah, because I always talk about, people ask you, anytime you're a writer, people ask you, where do your ideas come from? And I'm like, you have ideas too. Everybody does. Just when you have like a weird dream or like a batshit thought that comes into your brain, just write it down. And we have this in common with Dean Kuntz.
Yeah. Yeah.
You come back and sometimes they're shit and sometimes they're okay though,
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
It's good. Well, speaking of the ideas that were winners, with that transition, Adrian.
Smooth. She's done this before.
Right?
I've been podcasting for a year and a half.
We have to talk about The Coward because first of all, just because it's great. Second of all, because it's going to be one of my top reads of this year. I can tell already because I absolutely adored it. But what was the inspiration for this story? Like what was the kernel for that one, if you remember?
Yeah, lots of different things fed into that.
You can pitch the audience on it too, by the way, I'm realizing, just in case.
Yeah. So it's on my shelf just here behind me. The Coward came from a number of different places. I read a lot of biographies as well for the people I find interesting. I don't read just, everything. And I'd read one about a soldier, American soldier, who'd gone to war and come back, and he'd lost like one of his legs and one of his arms, and it was his kind of struggle to come back to society and rebuild his life. And he ended up being like a minor celebrity, and he was on Dancing with the Stars and stuff, and he's done all sorts of cool things. There's also a show in the UK called New Lives in the Wild, and it's where this journalist guy goes and meets people who've given up the day-to-day 9 to 5 office job for whatever reason. Something's happened to them, trauma, or they want to change, or they take a gamble, and they go and live in a totally different place in the world. And one of the episodes I watched was about a guy who'd been a journalist in some of the most difficult places in kind of the Baltic states and bordering Russia, and he'd seen atrocities. And over the course of kind of 10 years, he'd basically ended up with PTSD. And so he ended up being one of these episodes of this TV show, New Lives in the Wild. He quit being a journalist, traveled around Canada with his then fiance. They found this place, they bought it, and they ended up becoming kind of tourist guides for people to go and holiday with them, and they take them out and look at the bears in not far from Vancouver. And I thought, that's just so cool. He's such an interesting guy. And then I went on holiday with a friend, and we went there as tourists and stayed with this guy and met him, and I spoke to him. And then I bought his book and I read that. And so that was swirling around the back of my head. And growing up in the last 20 years, the number of wars I've seen and the number of people coming back damaged from war, soldiers who survived, but they've come back broken by their experiences. And other things in the book, like celebrity culture and propaganda and fake news. And there's a nod to like X Factor shows in the book at one point. Like all of this stuff was in my head. And I thought, what if we had this guy? So the picture of the coward is Kel Cressy, when he was 17, hears about there's this great evil rising in the north, and all the kings gather all of the great heroes together to go forward and slay it. And he sees them and says, well, you know, they're all rich and everyone loves them and they're famous, and I want to be just like them. And he tags along with them. Despite their best wishes, he ends up going with them on this great adventure to the north. The evil is vanquished, but in the process, he watches all of the heroes die in front of him, and he's the only one that comes back. And so the story actually starts 10 years on from that, when he's basically been living with PTSD, broken by his experiences, living a quiet life on a farm, and he hates celebrities and culture and all that kind of stuff. He doesn't want anything to do with it. But in the 10 years, they've used his stories as propaganda to inspire other people, to get them to join the army. A bard turned it into a saga and has been singing it across the 5 kingdoms, so everyone knows the stories, but someone confronts him and asks him for the truth, and he's still not ready to face what happened. And then the story begins where there's something else that surfaces in the north, and the king's like, well, you did it once, you can go and do it again. He's like, I really don't want to do that. And he's still broken by his experiences, and he ends up going on this quest again, a similar quest with a new group of kind of very different individuals. So yeah, lots of bits and pieces I kind of gathered in my brain. I think about it like, candy floss machines. We start with a stick and you put it around the edge, and after a bit of time it builds up. I think that's what it's like, gathering ideas in my brain, that over time, eventually, like, hey, now I've got a thing. But to begin with, you've got pieces. I carried half an idea around in my head for 4 years, and I didn't know what it connected with. And then something else, 4 years, and it clicked, and I went, oh, that's what that story is. Oh, I've got it now. But the coward came within about 3 years of thinking on it and kind of making notes and working it through. It's something just clicked, and I thought, all right, yeah, of course, that's what it's about. A guy who's broken by his experiences of being a hero, but write it as if it was real,
And it's so poignant for, like you were saying, like everything that we've experienced, like especially everyone who's lived through the last, I would even say like beyond the last 20 years, like you're talking about the journalist who was in the Baltic states. I assume that was in the 90s after like the dissolution of the Soviet Union, when shit was really, really bad. And Yugoslavia was like breaking apart, and all these different ethnic groups were like fighting each other. And then on top of that, it's like you have Iraq and Afghanistan and all these wars going on.
Kuwait, of it.
Yeah, now just like everything that's kind of like piled up on top of that, the wars on terror. And this is something that I think now is really being addressed in terms of the trauma that people are experiencing. Not just the people who actually go to these wars, but sort of like a mass psychosis of like
it's collective human trauma.
Yeah. Basically like all the propaganda that's been fed. Like when you mentioned that propaganda thing, like in my mind, like thinking about the book again, I was like, yeah, basically just like propping someone up on the news as like, here's a hero who fought for their country, lost their brothers in arms, et cetera, et cetera. Do you want to join the army? And it's like, that's fucking twisted. Like, it's actually like a very twisted narrative, but there's so many things that you explore in this series that I really, really love, you know, in terms of like the heroes, and especially like the ways in which you've subverted the hero's journey in a lot of ways, and talked about things like bravery and redemption from angles that we don't often see too often in fantasy, especially like you having grown up with, you know, Dragonlance, with David Gemmel's work, with all these different authors who are really basking in the glory of, I would say, like the post Tolkien heroes kind of fantasy era. Yeah. And you just like dug deep into that and explored it in really interesting ways.
Thank you. I wanted to kind of look at it from a slightly more realistic kind of viewpoint and think about it, because people, you know, jokingly say that Joe Abercrombie's Lord Grimdark, and, you know, but I would argue that, you know, in every generation you go back, there's the equivalent of that kind of a thing. So I think that
it's actually Michael Fletcher. So,
well, there you go. He's the current Lord Grimdark. But if you go back even further, like David Gemmell, he's writing in the late 80s and 90s.
Yeah,
he was writing about grey characters doing the best in really difficult situations, and that's kind of the thing that I took. Like, the title of the coward, people think it just refers to Cal, but it doesn't. It refers to everybody in the book. All of the group are all cowards in their own way, and it's just about the nature of heroism. And the whole of the book is totally summed up in the first line. And I'm not normally one of these things where like, oh, the first line is the best, but I think the best first line I've ever written is the first line of The Coward, because it sums up everything about the book. Once you've read that, you know kind of where it's going, and what it's about. But it took a while, I think. Once I got the framework, it was making sure I explored all the different areas and I poke at things. And because some people have read it and said, oh, it's a fun adventure story in a reimagined quest novel. I'm like, it is on the surface, but that's only the beginning of what the story is actually about. There's all this other stuff going on. Like, I had one guy contact me and said, so, you know, you were in the services, weren't you, in the armed forces? And I was like, no, I wasn't. He said, oh, from reading it, it felt like you were. And like, well, I've done my job well from talking to people and reading these things. If you thought that, I'm like, but thank you. That was really nice to hear.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite books of the year, because it is like a fun adventure story.
Yeah.
And you can enjoy it that way. There's monsters. It's fast paced. There's humor to it. But it also has some of the most like probably humanly realistic portrayals of violence and how people just in general would react to it that I've seen in fantasy recently, at least. But yeah, so there you go. Everybody go read The Coward and the sequel, The Warrior. They're both super good. And it's Finnish duology. Check it out.
It's done. Yeah,
it's done. You can read the whole thing. You can binge it in a weekend. BB. Yeah. But let's dive into your most recent series. Starts with the Judas Blossom, and then the upcoming, or by the time this airs, the newly released Blood Dimmed Tide. Yes, the newly released, and when we time travel into the future. We talked a little bit in the intro about how this is your first foray into historical fantasy.
Yeah.
What was it that made you want to dive into historical fantasy? Was it what candy floss piece attached to our stick first for this one?
Because dude, you just like Mongols and Persia. That's like historical fucking candy for me.
Yes.
So I my dad's from Iran, my mum's from England, so my Persian heritage is important to me. It's been an aspect of my life, my entire life in England, where I've grown up, but it's always been a part of me. This series allowed me to explore that in some ways, and to show some people parts of me that they've never really seen, because I don't really tend to talk about it, because I'm really quite a private person. There's lots of stories that have been written about this era, Marco Polo, The Adventures of Marco Polo, but they always kind of focus on the court of Kublai Khan. There's like the Netflix TV series Marco Polo. It's all about this. And it's set within the same era, but there again, it's just one kind of part of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century. And so I wanted to do something different. I wanted to talk about conquest and rebels. And it was only after I'd written The Judas Blossom, and then we started working on the blurb on the back of the book and thinking about it. And I started piecing it together, and I thought, hang on, it's about a massive global empire that's conquering everybody and taking over. And it's about a plucky group of rebels fighting back. Why is that familiar? Luke Skywalker, Star Wars. Oh God, I've done Star Wars with Mongols and Persia.
Historical Star Wars.
Yeah.
I didn't make the connection until at the end. Because the idea
Angry
was
Robot missed an opportunity. Be like,
I was like,
Star Wars
having
meets
read
Marco
both of them,
Polo.
I didn't make the connection until just now.
See,
either.
I wrote the book and I didn't make the connection until I was working on the blurb, and I suddenly went, "Oh my God, yeah, okay." Because
Tale
I've
as
done
old as
books.
time, all right?
I've done books with big wars, but equally I wanted to write about a small group of rebels. Like, if you haven't got an army, how do you fight back? And you have to do it from the inside and take them apart. And that's where I started. The idea of the core of the idea was, and I was like, right, so how do I do it when the empire is so big, the Mongol Empire, and it's growing? Where do we set it? How do we do it? And I started reading up on different things. I've got a stack of books. I started researching again, like years before I started planning. So this was probably when I was writing The Coward. I was then researching stuff for this trilogy. And I'd watched Marco Polo and thought, this is brilliant. Well, what's going on in kind of Persia? And what's going on in Europe? And there's some things that today we take for granted and think they're absolutely amazing, like communication. The fact that right now the three of us are talking from across the world and it's instantaneous. But you go back to the 13th century and the Mongols had developed a road network system and communication system that was really fast. They could get a message across the empire by having way stations where you literally ride a horse for 20 miles, drop off your horse, pick up the next horse, and the messenger carries on. And the messengers would carry the information, the letters, but also they'd carry this kind of gold massive thing that had the name of the Khan on, lots of information. And basically it was like a get out of free jail pass. Like if you touch that and you interfere with that messenger, they'll come down, they'll kill you, they'll burn your whole family, they'll take the village. It's like you do not touch messengers. So information would move really fast across the empire, but normally would take weeks.
For context, it's like this is an empire that spanned from like Eastern Europe through Persia,
all the way across China,
all the way into
China,
down to India, like northern India. It's like it spanned. It was like
one of the biggest
one of the biggest empires in the entire history of humanity. Gigantic.
And so setting it in this era where basically the empire is knocking on the door of modern day Europe, they're growing, they're pushing towards India, they're kind of going towards Japan and potentially down towards Africa and the Middle East expanding. So all of these interesting stories were going on, but they always tend to focus on Marco Polo and over there with Kublai and the court and China and that kind of thing. So I wanted to talk about some Persian things that I've grown up with and part of my culture, and do an interesting story and write about Star Wars in the Middle East, apparently, with Mongols and Persians without even realizing it. And a plucky group of rebels fight back from the inside. No lightsabers, though. But there is some weirdness, and there is something. I didn't want to do straight historical fiction because that felt a little bit too much like handcuffs. So no one else. So Connor Golden has done historical fiction novels about the Mongols, but in terms of adult fantasy, no one's done historical adult fantasy set within this period in this era before I did it. I mean, you've got things like Shelley Parker Chan's Shu Became the Sun, but that's obviously over in China, and I think it's a century or two before, and now we're getting other tales from other parts of the world and other parts of history that are really interesting to see. But I thought, I've not seen this, and I've been reading fantasy since as I was a kid. And if anybody's going to do it, right, I now think after like 8 years under my belt on a certain number of books, I think I can have a go.
Yeah,
I wasn't ready. As it turns out, I wasn't ready. But
we're never ready.
No, but the thing is, like, as we've been talking to you, you teased at the beginning as well, like the amount of research you put into it, and you've been mentioning. Obviously, it's not just like watching the Marco Polo TV show. It's like you mentioned, you got this stack of books. You are really immersing yourself in this. Research is one of those things that can make you better prepared to tackle a project like this, a time period like this, especially one that's based in historical reality. But what was your research process like for this? Because like I, we've had some guests like Stuart Turton. We were talking to him recently, and his research process is like go visit the thing, the place, not just spending all of your time in a library or reading books or being on like going on Google or Wikipedia or what have you. So what's research like for you?
Reading, a lot of reading, a lot of watching stuff, a lot of time building things, and then forgetting certain things of my research because I'm writing in a place, in a period that people won't know. And for many people, it will feel like pure fantasy. They don't know this era. They don't know this part of the world. And my fear was the more barriers I put in place, the more difficult it would be for them to be immersed within this world and for it to feel real. So there's a number of very specific words in the Mongol Empire, and when they were commanding units, and they'd have different words like 10 soldiers, 100 soldiers, 1,000 soldiers. There's a different name for every kind of group. I forgot all of those on purpose. The ranks aren't the same. I changed them to like captain, lieutenant. So I'm putting things in knowing that primarily the readers will be Western and there'll be English language readers. They're the kind of the biggest audience initially. If it goes into a language, is great. They'd probably change it back anyway. But I knew this. So I'm thinking, right, I need things that are familiar. I need things that people kind of can hold on to. Because when you do it with fantasy, it's the same thing. Before you introduce the weird batshit magic system, they sit down and go into a tavern and they have a beer and eat some chicken. They don't like eat something that you completely made up because no one knows what the fuck that is. So you have to give them something that's familiar, some touchstones that people go, all right, I know what this is. Yeah, the sun comes up, the sun goes down, it's raining, it's hot, it's cold. They've got, drinking beer and they're riding horses, great. And then you bring in the weird shit and they go, well, what? But they're already in by then because they're invested in the people, in the situation. Whereas if you throw too much stuff at the reader at the beginning, they're likely to just get knocked out of the book. So my fear was trickle in certain phrases, trickle in certain words. Like even if you go back to Peter Brett, when he did the Painted Man or the Warded Man, he starts with one or two little words every now and then in the first book. And you're like, what's that? And then over the series, he adds more and more of them. So by the time you get to the fifth book, you know what the words are because he's given you the root and he's built them up. But if he threw all that in right at the beginning, when he's trying to get people interested in Arlen and his fate and the demons, I think it was, so you build people gradually up. I think that's the right way to do it, where if you throw them in the deep end, sink or swim, some people will do it and they're happy to do it, but I want people to enjoy the book. I don't want them to just think, all right, get the thesaurus out. What's this? Or go and Google that word. And like, they're no longer interested in the character and the story and what's going on. They've stepped away from the book. I want them to be immersed. So I rounded off some of the corners on purpose, knowing that it'll piss off historians, but equally I'll point to the spine and say, historical fantasy. See?
Yes.
Fantasy. It is? Yeah.
I love that.
Accurate. It's fantasy still. The magic, that's a clue. Weird magic shit. Maybe that was a clue that it's fantasy. The rest of the stuff, no clue. No. Hello?
They didn't pick it up. No. I do love that though, because I think that, to your point, I think the really intense historical fiction readers would be game to, buckle down and, go through all the really intense minutia. But fantasy readers, like for me, I'm not a big historical fiction reader. I read some, but not a ton. I probably wouldn't be game. And so I very much enjoyed that it was rounded at the corners. And so a couple things too that I love there. First of all, I love that your research process is books and stuff that's accessible, because I love talking to writers that travel for research and stuff. I think that's so fascinating and so incredibly cool and so important if you can do it. But not everybody can do that.
No, I can't take 4 months off to go to Mongolia and go to Persia and stand in some temples and be like, this is what it smells like. Like I can't do that, and I can't find that online. So I just kind of think about it and be like, okay, it's really old, it's really hot, and I have done like things like. One point I was, it was February in Persia, and I suddenly thought, oh, it's the weather's quite cool, and I thought, wait, it's a different part of the world, and it's. Oh my God, what's the weather like? Oh God. And I had to go and like Google that and check it and be like, oh no, it's okay. The weather is not too similar. It's a bit hot, a bit cold. But things like that, I had to Google things because I suddenly thought, okay, I need to get a ship from here to here. Could they do a ship? I don't know. That took me 4 hours to find out for like a small paragraph of 4 lines. And someone will read that and skip right over that fucking thing. And I'm like, you go back and read that for 4 hours. 4 hours and appreciate
Over and over.
4 hours. And when you've got the 4 hours, then you can move on to the story. They don't care. That's the thing again. Like, they got to shit from there to there.
But
Done.
if it was
Story
like
moves on.
unbelievable, it would catch their attention and kind of throw them out of it a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
So you spent 4 hours making it as like
find out
innocuous
it was
as possible. Yeah.
Otherwise, I've just added 3 months to the journey because it went it by horse. I'm like, I can't be doing that. So, yeah, I had to change some things. So the first book, The Judas Blossom, all of the main events in this book are historically accurate. Who was there, how long they went on, and what happened, I've fiddled with a bit because sometimes a battle would go on for 6 months and I can't just be like, right, everyone sits around and the rest of the story waits for the battle to be over. Right, now we move on with the stories. I didn't want time jumps. I wanted a cohesive story all the time. So every time I move to a different character and come back, it's still with this insane time period. A year passes, or 2 years pass within the first book, but it's part 1, part 2, so it's still months are going by, but you see everything. It's not like, and then there was a battle, and then 2 years later, the battle ended. Now the story continues. But like, nah, what happened in the 2 years? Come on.
Right. What were the details? Well, speaking of the details, let's talk a little bit about the magical elements to the book.
The weird shit.
The weird shit. And I do think it's really fun. It's done very subtly in the first book, especially. It kind of really seeps in and creeps in, and then it ramps up more and more over time. Do the magical elements, I am going to say this wrong, probably the Kozan. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Rushed it. Is there a historical basis for this power? Is this just purely your invention? Kind of how were you able to interweave stuff like that from your research and the magical elements?
So it's not really a spoiler as such. It's based upon something that exists that then extrapolated to a what if. So Zoroastrianism is an ancient religion, but there was an offshoot, like a splinter sect of it that died out a long time ago. And there's very little information about it. And like, if you go back to the Roman Empire and you think about all the Romans, they had so many different religions within the soldiers, and some of them were very kind of what we call pagan religions now. And they were fascinating, weird kind of stuff that we don't really know, and we kind of make things up about it. And I was thinking about one of these religions and this offshoot, and I thought, well, what if it was something a bit more defunct? What if it was something that existed and it hasn't spread because it's really rare? There's no churches, there's no temples, there's nothing written down. You're either one of these people or you're not, and therefore you don't inherit it. It's seemingly chosen by random. Like, if you have it, your kids aren't going to have it, like in some magical systems. And I just started playing around with the idea of it and thinking, okay, well, how would it work? How would you structure it? How would people continue to know about it? Where would it come from? And there'd be little pieces and bits and pieces in history that have been written down, but they're fragments. And so it's not really a spoiler, but in the first book, someone realizes there's something there and they start doing research, but they only get snippets in like a language, and someone translates it and says, I've got this phrase, but I don't even know what it really means. And so there's no one to teach this guy how it works or what it means or what it does. He doesn't know, and so he gets it wrong and he makes a mess, and he thinks he's got the hold of it, and it nearly kills him because he wasn't actually doing it right, and it's not the focus of the thing. So Zoroastrianism is all about to do with fire, but fire isn't, they don't believe fire is God. It's just fire is a symbol that they have, and they have a flame burning quite often in the kind of temples. But then I thought, well, that's the basis, but what's next on this other splinter sect that's gone now that no one talks about because no one knows anything about it? And what if? And then I started playing around with it, and pieces came together from other places. And in the second book, there's a lot more magic and a lot more weird shit.
Your world needs like a Rosetta Stone so that people know, like, how the fuck do I do this? Where are the instruction manuals?
This is it. It doesn't exist. It's either you sink or swim, you learn, or you die. There are no there's no Padawan and Jedi's teaching you how it works.
No guardrails.
Well,
No.
speaking of sinking and swimming, let's talk about the publishing landscape. Going a bit broader now, because you mentioned at the beginning, like your first novel, you hit number 10. Like with this book, you're hitting number 10. Your first one was Battle Mage.
Mm-hmm.
That came out almost a decade ago.
Yep.
Looking back over the past 10 years, how has the publishing landscape changed, at least in your eyes?
Massively changed. When I started, self-publishing was just beginning. It wasn't really a well-known function. Before I got published, when I was, sending novels out and got rejected and stuff, the only things that existed was traditional publishing. The alternative was what we call vanity press, where you just send your finished manuscript to a company, they print the book and they ship it back to you. They don't do anything, like no editing, nothing. And that was vanity press, and people would hand sell their books. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I want to have my book on the shelf next to all of my heroes in the local Waterstones. And so that was the route I pursued for years and years and years. But in the last 10 years, self-publishing has come on massively now. It's fulfilling niches that people still want to read, but traditional publishing has moved on from. It's grown into new areas. It's developed genres that then traditional publishing has picked up. There's the SFBO, of course, where people have won that, then become traditionally published because it's been proven to be a popular book. It's been really successful. And then they get kind of traditional contracts going back to, like more recently, Justin Lee Anderson won the last one. And
Josiah Bancroft as well.
Yeah.
He didn't win.
He didn't win, no, but he got, for the Books of Babel and Jonathan French and, so
Alexander
many others.
Darwin as well.
Yeah, of course. Combat Codes. So that's like one avenue. And then ebooks became a thing, and e-readers took off. And then suddenly Kindles were everywhere. And now there are a lot more hybrid authors than ever before. And I think realistically, if you're not, so people always talked about, there used to be, like top sellers and then mid-list, and then I don't know what you can call the third tier. Now there's just the top sellers.
I don't even think there is a tier below mid-list.
Yeah, I was going to say, is
now it's just tip of the spear and everybody else. That's basically it. And so there's more books coming out than ever before. I can't keep up. My to-read pile and books I've read pile behind me just shows you, and there's more in other rooms. So keeping up is impossible. You have to be more picky these days. A lot of the books that are coming out, like self-publishing, some of them are just awful because they haven't put the duty of care into them. Some of them are absolutely indistinguishable from a traditionally published book. The artwork is astonishing. The covers, the editing is really good. It's up to standard. But some people just write a book and bang it out. And I think to begin with, that put people off self-publishing a lot. They just thought, well, this is just an extension of vanity press. You haven't paid anybody to edit the book or actually say, how about you work on this, work on that. And it was no kind of progression of craft. It was just write a book, bang it out, make a bit of money, write another one, bang it out. And some people made their living that way. But now some people just do self-publishing. They don't want to do traditional publishing. And I always talk about this. I never say one's good and one's bad. There's pros and cons to each. And I think it's based upon your own personal finances. Can you afford to put the money in and the time and learn all the aspects to be a business manager and be self-published? Or are you more happy to be traditionally published because you've got other things going on in life, a busy job that you love, that you want to keep doing and put out a book every year, every couple of years, whatever it might be. So, a lot of traditionally published authors, especially in the fantasy space, have full or part-time jobs still. Some of them would like to be full-time like me, but others are like, yeah, I don't want to. I would still want to have my job because I like what I do and I don't want to give that up. Whereas other people are like, no, the dream is to be full-time. It's changed so much now. It's totally unrecognizable, I think, from when I started in 2015.
Yeah. Well, that's actually like a perfect transition into what I wanted to ask you next.
Look who's showing off his chops.
I know. I was like, look at that.
Professional.
Right? Like, I've done this before. You're a fellow day job warrior, right? I'm a day job warrior.
Marketing warrior.
Right? But it is challenging at times, right? To balance the demands of a full-time corporate type job with the ephemeral and very inconsistent demands of writing and publishing, right? So how do you balance your writing life with your other responsibilities, and just like what wisdom do you have for other writers battling this?
It goes back to what I said before, that I'm not one of these people who say you have to write every day. I think for most people that's unreasonable and it's not feasible. I think some kind of consistency is a good idea, as often as you can. I think if you're starting out to begin with, you've never written a book before, you should plan your book to some degree. Because the danger is you start working on something, you're really excited, even like Nano. I think NaNoWriMo is really useful as a tool, and I think it's great for community, and I think it serves a great purpose. But I also think it's dangerous in some ways because it sets false expectations for people, saying, well, I did it in 1 month. If I do this for the next 6 months, I'll have a book, or next 3 months. I'm like, yeah, but you nearly died during NaNoWriMo and every other aspect of your life was pushed to the edges because you knew you had to do it for this month. Mm-hmm. It's not feasible. Writing a book is always a marathon. Even if you write a book typically within 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 3 months, if some people do it that fast, it's still a long process. So it's always a case of, if you get a couple of hours free in a coffee shop before you go home for the day, you write a couple of hours, plan the next bit, plan the frame of the book, because life happens, stuff gets in the way, job changes, house, something, disaster, and you come back 3 months later and you try and pick up the pieces from where you were. With no plan, it's that much more difficult. Whereas if you've got some kind of roadmap, some kind of signpost, you're like, okay, that's what I was going to do next, right? And you can carry on. I think if you don't write and have huge gaps in between, you develop like ring rust on your muscles, essentially. So the idea of writing every day is great, but also the danger is you burn out because you're pushing too hard all of the time. I also think word counts can be useful for the same reason, because you say, right, I'm going to do 1,000 words. Oh, but got a really exciting bit, and you stop because you're still excited. So the next time you come back, and you carry it back on again. Whereas if you just burn all the way through until you're exhausted, and then you come back the next day and you're like, I don't know what I was doing. Where are we? So it's finding your own path forward, but some consistency, I think, is essential to finish a book. My advice is always write one book at a time and finish the book. No matter how long it takes, no matter how often you do it, no matter if you do it in 5-minute slices or 10-minute slices, it takes you 2 years. Finish that draft. It's so important.
I completely agree. That is like so much of what I had to embody to write Mushroom Blues.
Yeah.
Because it was like,
the
like
kids
15,
got to school, you've got 20 minutes, right, I'll write for 20 minutes, that's it, that's all I've got, I'll write for those 20 minutes.
I mean, in my case, it was like literally writing huge parts of this book in 15, 20, 30-minute segments with a napping baby on my lap, And it's like, you just do whatever the fuck you gotta do.
That's the thing, that's what drives me nuts when people say, oh, I would write a book if I had the time. And it's like, none of us have
I'm
time.
I'm a magic time turner, and I'm able to freeze time, and that's how I fit it in around my life. It's like,
exactly. It's like,
when I worked full time, I would stay up till midnight and write like 5 days a week, and I'd get up at 6 o'clock the next morning for work. And I did that for months and months and months and years, and I'd be short on sleep, and it probably hurt my health during that period because I wanted to do it and I needed to do it, But the other thing is that someone will say, if I've got a 4-hour period, now I'm going to write. No way. No. You write for 20 minutes. If you can write consistently for 20 minutes regularly, great. Once you got the 20 minutes done, push it to 30. Once you got that done, push it to 40. But if you're just like 4 hours, brilliant, you'll just, play on your phone for 3 hours, 50 minutes, and then write for 10 minutes. It's like, dude, don't try it. Build up to it. Time slices, not slabs. Build up to the slab. That's my...
There you go.
I invented time slabs and time slices.
I invented time slabs.
That you actually did invent. Yeah. All right. Well,
it's all borrowed wisdom.
Usually we close out with the 2-parter, but you already gave listeners and viewers a good bit of soundbite writing advice. Be consistent, people. But I would also like to get a weird or random fact from you, something that you find to be utterly fascinating.
So, did you know that cats, domesticated cats, have an extra organ in their skull that's called the Jacob's gland, and they found it like years and years ago, and it's like an extra sense. So in addition to all the other senses that cats have, eyes and their great hearing and their whiskers on their forearms and stuff, they also have the Jacob's organ, And it's somewhere between smell and taste. And it's this extra kind of sense that they have. And that's a kind of really weird and interesting. So your cat, MJ, next up,
I'm looking back at him.
Dude, what's it?
Thorin,
So
show me your Jacob's gland.
Show it. But they have an extra sense. And it's cool things like that constantly filter into my stories and my ideas that I think about. Like, there's genetic memory in species on this planet. There's no reason for frogs to come back year after year because they weren't alive. The pond hasn't been there for 10 years. The grandparents didn't come, but 3 generations before that they came. So why do they keep coming back? And it's genetic memories that are being passed down. Things in nature like that inspire me, and they lodge in the back of my brain. And I'm just like, that could be interesting. I can use that one day. So I'm constantly gathering stuff all the time.
MJ will never look at Thorin the same. He's like, you're smelling me and tasting me at the same time.
I mean,
true story.
Yeah, like try to say that to him, and he'll bite me, and then he will be tasting me.
Yeah.
Well, it's like cats.
No, but
that
he
no
can like smell.
wants.
He can like smell, taste your fear.
They can smell everything. There's like there's stories about cats in old people's home that go and sit in the bed of someone, and a couple of days later that person died, and then the cat goes to the next another person's bed, and they're like, "Uh-oh."
So how should I feel about the fact that my cat sleeps with me in the bed?
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
He knows that I'm gonna die.
You're okay.
He's portending your doom.
In like 50 years, but he's waiting.
Right.
Playing the long
He's
game
just
at this
really
point.
early. Yeah.
He's so
Playing the long
patient,
game.
man. He's like, my child, since you're going to be living longer than me, my child, I'll pass on that genetic memory.
There we go, the genetic memory.
Yeah.
Yes.
We bundled the facts together.
Oh my God. All right. Well, on that wonderful note, Stephen, thank you so much for chatting with MJ and I today. I really appreciate you hanging out. And this is a lovely time. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, man.
As well, for anyone who contributes to our Patreon at $5 or more each month, you can hear a reading by Stephen from The Blood Dim Tide. So go check that out. Stephen, could you please let everyone know where they can find you online?
Yeah, sure. The best place to get me is my website, stephen-aryan.com. Instagram. I've got a YouTube channel that's got like a couple hundred videos, writing
MJ
advice.
And me.
I interviewed MJ, I've interviewed Adrian, I've interviewed lots of self-published and traditionally published authors, and everyone's got a different story about how they became a writer. And there's lots to learn just from listening to them and other people. And there's lots of Q&A videos on there about traditional publishing and stuff. So yeah, those are the best places to find me.
Right on. And go pick up Stephen's books. You got 10 to choose from. You got double digits. Go pick.
Plenty to read.
But the Blood Dim Tide is out now, so go get that and support Stephen and his work. You can also follow SFF Addicts on Instagram, Twitter, Threads, all that jazz at sffaddictspod. You can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. You can go get your fungal dose with Mushroom Blues. MJ, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me across all main socials at MJ Kuhn Books. Or you can just find me on my website, mjkuhn.com. Got all the links there. Got a free novelette there that you can get if you sign up for my newsletter. And you can buy my books there too. Okay, thanks.
Go support the Thorin Food Fund. Go get Among Thieves, Thick Ass Thieves. And also, if you're a writer, if you're getting into writing, go pick up MJ's Ultimate Story Bible and go learn a little bit about how she approaches creating a book, creating characters, all that fun stuff. All right. Well, that's it for this week. That's it for this episode. Stay tuned next week for part 2 with Stephen for a mini masterclass on writing the opposite gender. For now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.